Okay, let's take a look at things from the perspective of metaphysics. Hold on a second while I screw my camera in here. There we go. I swear everybody out there thinks that... I need to zoom in a little bit. There we go. Everybody out there thinks that death is the opposite of life. Is that really the true? Is that what the wise forms of metaphysics have ever taught? The answer to that is no, that's not what they've taught. Death is not the opposite of life. By the way, everybody loves talking about dimensions. Of course, we have length, width, depth, and of course, presumably the fourth dimension of time from the premise of hardcore Pythagorean, Platonic, and Indian monistic metaphysics. There's only two dimensions, spatial and counterspatial. These are the realms of life and disembodied being. We could actually refer to life, of course, as embodied being, disembodied life, or being as counterspace. These are the two dimensions. And this, of course, is the reductionistic truth and follows Occam's razor paradigm perfectly. You know, simplicity is divinity. So if death is not the opposite of life, then what the hell is it? Well, death is not the opposite of life. It's the end of life. Over here, we actually have the ends of these two. This is the dimension above of space, of time, of phenomena, right? And down here, we actually have the dimension, of counterspace, of noumena. This is the dimension of true being, of ontology, and this is the dimension of existence. By the way, English doesn't have very many good words of metaphysics, but existence is a really good one because existence means existence, which means to be outside of yourself. So death is not the opposite of life. Over here, we actually have the ends. So what is the opposite of life? Well, the opposite of life is right here. These are the opposites. Right here. The opposite of life, it's disembodiment. Death is not the opposite of life. There's two types of pain also taught in all forms of monistic and logical ontology and metaphysics. One would, of course, be physical and psychological pain. And this, of course, is the suffering, or in the ancient Pali, would be the word dukkha, of existential existence. There's a different sort of pain that doesn't have anything, because, you could experience a different type of pain, kind of like someone has a horrible, horrible nightmare while they're dreaming. Yeah, it has nothing to do with your physical body. There's a different sort of pain, and it could last a whole lot longer. And cruder forms of religion, and I'm not interested in religion at all. I'm not interested in religions. They call it hell, but it's disembodied pain, but not pain in the true sense. It's the pain of identification phenomenology, or what the ancient Indians called seeing self and what is not self. Of course, everybody thinks that this is themselves, the psychophysical, Bob, Sue, Larry, so on and so forth, but that's not. This is what the ancient Indians and the Pali called anatta, or anatman. This is not yourself. And down here we actually have, in the Sanskrit, atman, or in the Sanskrit, Atman. You have the Sekitupentos appear, but wisdom, agnosis. What's the binding agent that keeps one within one of these two or the other? Let's actually erase a little bit of this. We actually have too many drawings here. Let's talk about a cycle. So we know that death is not the opposite of life. It's the end of life. The end of disembodiment is this, birth. The end of disembodiment is embodiment, and birth, which of course is accentuated by life, distinction with a difference, but ultimately a distinction without a difference. The end of disembodiment is, of course, birth. And then we have a nice little cycle. We go from disembodiment to birth, and then into life, which ends in death, which, of course, at death, one is, of course, disembodied. The question is, does the cycle repeat itself? The binding agent or the glue, if I could actually erase a little bit of this here. There's a binding agent for both of these. It either keeps you in one dimension, the dimensions of space, or down here in the dimensions of counter space. Yeah, what would keep you in the dimension of counter space, and what would keep you in the dimension of space, perpetually so? You know, even if you lived to be 100 years or 200 years. Well, the binding agent for life is primordial or metaphysical agnosis. There we go. And the binding agent for disembodiment, perpetual disembodiment, which of course is transcendence, which of course is theurgy, or it's also referred to as Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, or also said in the Pali, Suvimutta Chetasa. It's also called Tathagata, which literally means gone to the absolute, or gone to the Brahman. Agata, past tense, to tat, meaning Brahman, or the absolute, just as in the Sanskrit command, tattvam asi, that thou art. The binding agent that keeps one in disembodiment, yeah, in counter space, is the glue. Remember, we're talking about the binding agent. Let's keep it really simple. The binding agent would be wisdom. So the binding agent that keeps you in the realm of space, yeah, and space, of course, is temporal, is agnosis, metaphysical agnosis. And I don't mean psychophysical agnosis, which would be conventional or empirical ignorance. No. There's a distinction in metaphysics between conventional or existential ignorance and primordial agnosis. Yeah, so the binding agent that repeats this cycle over and over again for spatial entities or being. There's two forms of being, of course. This is the mirage of being. Life is not true being. We all think the person in the mirror is real being, but of course it's not. It's nami swata, not my soul, not myself. And of course there's always two forms of self in all forms of monistic metaphysics. The true self and the not true self, or anatta. Yeah, that would be the exeostance of Bob, Sue, and Laria. Exeostance means being outside of yourself. In other words, embodiment, the realm of space. Of course, like I said, there's two forms of pain. And of course, pain is a really, really crude word. I don't want to use the Pali or the ancient Greek term, but we can talk about two types of pain. One spatial and one counterspatial. We could both call these conventionally pain without getting to the nuance between the two. But, you know, one is physical and psychological up here. And down here, we actually have a different sort of pain, which doesn't entail a physical body, but entails agnosis. Yeah. This is literally the definition from the very, very crude position of religions of what we would call hell. Literally disembodied pain. And that disembodiment means that down here, where there's no binding agent, it must end eventually. You still have the binding agent of agnosis with disembodiment. Yeah? Let's flip this over a little bit here. Okay, so for the realms of space, yeah? The realms of space, and this is the realm of counter space, we have these antinomies. Spatial, counterspatial, temporal, atemporal. Over here we have not the self, i.e. the existential or the psychophysical, or they say in the ancient Pali, namarupa, isakaya, namiswata. This body, i.e. the psychophysical, is not my soul. Let me repeat that. That's the most repeated phrase in ancient Pali, isakaya, namiswata. Rupa nata, veda nata, sana nata, sankhara nata, namarupa anatati. The psychophysical is not my soul. Not self and self, temporal, atemporal, spatial and counterspatial. And over here, of course, we have life, right? This is the realm of life and pain, both physical and psychological. The binding agents of agnosis and the binding agents of wisdom. Wisdom, of course, is what would keep you disembodied. You can be disembodied and still have no wisdom. Yeah? And what we call that hell. But that's not really a right term, because that's a bunch of religious crap. Yeah, not interested in religion. Religion is secularized metaphysics. Yeah, so we have the antinomies of... There's not antinomies, they're just different types of hell or pain. We can call both of these pain conventionally, except one is the realm of counterspace and the other one is the realm of space. This, of course, is the unreal. What we think is real is actually the unreal. And this is what the ancients talked about, the inverted tree. Humans always see things upside down and backwards. Ignorant beings, the commandment of both the Greeks and the Indians or the Kali Yuga and of ignorant beings by and large, is they always see things bass-ackwards, upside down and backwards. These are the dimensions of space, of life, and this is the dimensions of disembodiment. They both have their mirror counterparts. Yeah, they both have their mirror counterparts. But no, death is not the opposite of life. It's the end of life. And there's a binding agent between those two, like I said. Wisdom. The identification phenomenology that actually perpetuates this revolves around either agnosis or the lack thereof, or the inverse thereof, which of course is wisdom. Yeah, there's a binding agent between these four waypoints. We call them like truck stops, right? Or bus stops. That'd be a perfect thing. The bus stops of being, of ontology, either physical or aphysical or atemporal, which would be space and counter space. So we go the end of life as death, and death, of course, is disembodiment. And if you don't have the big W, wisdom, then we go from disembodiment to birth, and then life, meaning not just life itself at the beginning, which would be a birth, of course, by definition, but a long life, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years, 200 years, who gives a damn, which, of course, then goes to death. And then this leads back to disembodiment. And the binding agent for pure disembodiment, yeah? In other words, everything has been eliminated on the board, right? Everything has been eliminated except for one thing, disembodiment, yeah? Disembodied. The binding agent, where it is self-reflexive, in other words, the identification is self-reflexive, the binding agent that keeps this as itself, in perpetuity, and atemporal, the definition of the fulfillment of theurgy, is surrounded by, the big W, wisdom. Wisdom and the self, by the way, are one and the same thing. The self seeks itself as wisdom by definition from all forms of monistic metaphysics. This is the binding agent for true disembodiment. And this is the opposite of hell. What's the opposite of hell? It's not bliss. It's not physical bliss. You could call it bliss. The word we're looking for is fulfillment. What does fulfillment feel like? Most people have never felt fulfilled, because all embodied creatures have one characteristic in common, and that's materialism. And I don't literally mean, wanting more stuff and wanting more money. There are different layers of materialism. It's not just about owning more crap like cars and trucks and hot wives and money and more hot cars and more hot wives or hot girlfriends or, this is the binding agent for disembodiment. And this, of course, is theurgy. Yeah. True theurgy. Yeah. True theurgy. This is what the Greeks called epistrophe. Yeah. Embodiment is prohodos, which you could crudely say means going forth, but what it means is agnosis-driven embodiment. I hope that was making things pretty simple. This is about as simple as it gets. This is kind of like the Fisher-Price level of monistic metaphysics, or the clavis thereof. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you like this video. Yeah? Don't you love I'm using this 100-year-old chalkboard? If you like it, check the link below. Let me know what you think. Yeah? Lux e veritas.